Muy buenos días a todas y todos. Gracias por acompañarnos. My name is Gracia Goya, VP for Latin America with Hispanics in Philanthropy. I'm really excited to introduce this conversation. Today, we have two amazing women that will help us to understand how artificial intelligence is affecting our communities and shaping the world with biases that we challenge every day. Artificial intelligence allows humans to predict genetic diseases beyond human capability for early diagnosis and treatment. Everybody has heard about it. These technologies are advancing society in remarkable ways. However, we need to be cognizant of those implications. There can be significant adverse effects also. Improper or careless design and implementation of this technology can lead to dramatic effects like the propagation of systemic racism. I think that this is a matter that is really important for our communities. This armchair conversation will discuss how artificial intelligence propagates systemic racism and highlight techniques that we can use to make sure this behavior does not continue. Please join me to welcome Susan Gonzalez, who is CEO of A&U, and Gabriela Ramos, Assistant Director for Social and Human Sciences with UNESCO. Please find their amazing bios on the application. Both of them have an incredible experience working with this cutting-edge topic. And I would like to invite Gabriela and Susan to share a little bit about how the artificial intelligence is involved in ways that we can't imagine, but also how are the main challenges for our communities talking about artificial intelligence. I think that this is something new for some of us, and we would love to learn from her. Please help me to welcome. Susan, do you want to start?
Thank you so much. And thank you for the opportunity to join this conversation. And it's such an honor to join Gabriela Ramos from UNESCO. It really says a lot when UNESCO is focused on this issue. And I think it really represents how global and how big the issue of artificial intelligence is for our communities today. I think it's best to start if we take a step back, right? When we look at broadband access decades ago, it was a problem because our communities were left behind right out of the gate. And we learned recently with the pandemic, it's still a problem. Our communities are still struggling and do not have access. But what we cannot do with artificial intelligence is we cannot afford to leave our communities behind. Our communities, every single one of us touch AI every single day. The minute we pick up our phone or any other device, we are using artificial intelligence. So think about when we go online shopping, or when we apply for a home loan using our mobile device, or when we're looking for, a job. A lot of the employment services are all run by AI in the background. So what's important today is to really talk about what's happening globally and what we can do today to start making changes. Because artificial intelligence, AI, is almost pandemic-like. We know it's coming, and we know it's coming in a big way, and we are not prepared. Our communities need to be prepared, they need to be educated, and they need to be engaged. So, Graciela, tell me a bit about your global work, and what do you see with AI at the global level?
Well, it's great to be here with you, Susan and Gracia, and with this fantastic place.
In your work with UNESCO and in artificial intelligence, what do you see around the world? Are people having these conversations regarding underrepresented communities and the impact of AI on these communities? Is it just starting, or are people really interested at this point?
We are at UNESCO actually looking at the ethics of AI, and I think that's the way we want to frame ethics as you said, Susan, is pervasive, is everywhere. The gathering of the massive gathering of data that starts when you connect to the internet and you do searches, it really leads into more services, more proposals, more decision making based on algorithms and on data sets. And therefore, what UNESCO has done is to develop a recommendation on the ethics of AI, exactly to avoid that these technologies, instead of bringing solutions that are impressive for our quality of life and for the kind of issues that we can have in terms of medical records, administering international systems, what happens is that we just reproduce the bias and the discrimination that we have in the analog world. So we started negotiating this recommendation, and we have now 193 countries facing exactly the same questions. How do we ensure that human rights are respected? How do we ensure that these technologies are inclusive? How do we ensure that the more and more we take decisions based on recommendations derived from artificial intelligence and algorithms, we are not leaving the same people and same groups behind? So it's a very important conversation, particularly in the context of COVID.
Well, that's really good to hear, that so many countries are seeing that the ethics around AI certainly are not heading in the right direction. And I think to provide a little background around AI and algorithms and the ethics. So essentially, an algorithm is a recipe, if you will. It's an instruction to the computer on what to do next. So let's say we're shopping on Amazon and we bought a book about cooking pasta, let's say. And we are always searching other cookbooks about pasta. Well, it's going to recommend other books about pasta based on our behavior. And so that algorithm is what is behind the recommendations. It's following us, it's following our behavior. And so what's happening is that in technology companies, sadly, our communities are not represented at the table yet. So unfortunately, these algorithms or these instructions often are written by white men who have been in technology a while. And so the instructions are not written from the perspective of our communities. And that results in negative outcomes impacting our communities. So the conversation around ethics and AI is just that. How do we avoid the negative impacts on our community? So for example, when I mentioned applying for a loan, many of our community members will apply for a loan, let's say a home loan, on their phone, their mobile device. The AI algorithm behind that will notice how many mistakes were made, how many times the mistakes were corrected, where this person shops, does this person pay their bills on time, and of course, zip code. There's no conversation about any special circumstances. And often our communities, for example, are declined the loan because the algorithm has certain information and there comes an outcome. And so these are the types of things that's around AI ethics and also accountability, right, Gabriela? I mean, globally, someone needs to be accountable. And so what is the feedback you're getting from the countries that are interested? Is everybody gravely concerned? Are people taking action, or is the conversation beginning?
Well, I have to say that policymakers are concerned. And they are concerned because, as you said it, Susan, and you come from the technology world, there are two elements. First, the business model of these AI technologies, whereby you have 200 firms around the world producing 77% of all patents related to it, particularly located in certain countries. Nothing wrong with that. The only point is that it's not diverse, it's not inclusive, and therefore the technologies, as you said, had been developed by a very homogeneous group of people that are usually white male. I know we have analyzed that 85% of the developments on artificial intelligence are made by male-only teams, for example. If you talk about gender, so it's true that countries are now looking, and particularly Europe is now studying some directives to look at how much we can protect privacy. How can we ensure not only that the algorithm does not only translate the biases that we have in the analog world, and you have seen it when technologies for facial recognition does not recognize in the same level of quality Black women. But it's also the case that governments and business sector are taking decisions on the basis of artificial intelligence on whether to allocate, as you said, a loan, but whether to accept somebody in a university or to recruit people. And therefore, what we call is that these decisions need to be transparent. These decisions need to be accountable. If people feel that they have been discriminated, they should have recourse. These are things that we have in the analog world, in the real life. If you are affected in your interest, you can go to the court and get some redress. This is something that we need to build up in the world of artificial intelligence. These are the legal frameworks, and is a way that countries are looking at how governments can ensure that. But it's not only a question of the business sector; it's also the governments that need to use these technologies in an appropriate manner for those that are not very democratic. But the technologies are developed by humans, and therefore there are ways of controlling these issues also in a technological manner. And I would love to hear also from you how you feel that we can use technology to also ensure that the developments are follow a path that does not discriminate and that really enhance the respect for human rights.
Absolutely. Well, what I learned from working in technology is it's about, it's called shipping product and quickly, meaning, create a product and get it out the door as quickly as we can, right? Because we're all competing with each other. And that, particularly when it comes to AI, has proven to be detrimental, especially to communities of color. So for example, some companies had to pull back their facial recognition technology because they found that it was erroneously identifying communities of color. Let's say it was identifying a Black man, assuming that that person was going to participate in a crime based on AI intelligence, and that was incorrect. So what we are finding with tech companies now is, as you mentioned, nobody's manning the shop, if you will. Nobody is regulated. So technology companies are creating artificial intelligence at free will, which is beautiful, right? Because not all AI is bad. I mean, there's the good, there's the bad, and the ugly. And so what we've done at aiandyou.org is created a platform to help everybody understand AI basics. I mean, that's where we need to start, is to have the conversation so people understand what to look for. And to your point, Gabriela, for example, when someone is declined a loan, we offer resources where they can link through and file a claim and question, why was I declined for this loan? But these are resources that are in their infancy stages. So what we're doing is bringing all this information together to help communities get better educated. Now, when it comes to technology companies and what we talked about, a homogeneous approach to what is written to help the computer do what it's supposed to do for us, it's going to take a while, right, before we have people of color at the table. But meanwhile, what we're finding is there's an opportunity, let's say for a tech company that does not have a lot of diverse people at their tech table, is let's say maybe they reach out to the leaders of diverse organizations and have the conversation. So we're going to create this tool. We want to make sure that it won't adversely impact your community. Let's have this conversation. But right now, the AI ecosystem is very closed, if you will. And then meanwhile, we have all of our communities on the other side, and nobody's really communicating. So that's the one reason why I launched aiandyou.org, was to have this dialogue, because there have got to be other ways we can address some of these shortfalls while, to your point, governments start regulating, they come up with solid policies, but even that is going to take some time. So I think now what's most important is that our communities get prepared, because AI is coming in a big way and we are simply not prepared. And what levels the playing field more than education? Nothing, right? So that's what we need to do, is to educate our communities to what to look out for. And what do you see is the next step in the work with your global community and the commitments that they've made around AI ethics?
Well, the first thing is that we need to enact, and you put it very rightly, because innovation happens if you have good regulations, and it can be blocked if you are regulation free, but then there is no one to really will be looking at the issues. This is a very fast developing technologies. Therefore, you cannot regulate every single aspect of the developments in the AI world. But what you can do is to ensure that there is awareness, and that's a very important point that you mentioned, that people know. People need to know what is happening with their data, how their data is being used. They need to have to consent that their data is used in certain ways, or that they are lured to do certain things or take certain decisions. Second point, so this is very important that we develop the regulatory frameworks to ensure that the technological companies assume the responsibility and the accountability mechanisms to deliver better for communities. But there are very simple ways in which we are trying to promote not to have a very heavy burden regulatory framework, because then you stifle innovation, but to really ensure, for example, what you say, to have diversity in the teams that develop the technologies, ensure that there are women, ensure that there are people of color, ensure that there are people with very different backgrounds, because that will be an amazing checkpoint in terms of not reproducing biases and not coming with the mentalities that are just shared and put together. We are going to be looking at the policies. For us, policies work, policies in education, policies in different sectors on how to ensure that in the labor market you are not discriminated by an algorithm, how to ensure that in the communication field we are not flooded with this massive production of hate speech or racial discrimination. What do we do about gender? What do we do about the environment? So we have policy chapters, but more than anything, we are developing an ethical impact assessment so that the users and the producers themselves can be aware. Because as I said, you cannot overregulate everything. You need a very strong framework to ensure that the rule of law is respected, but at the same time, we need massive education and awareness so that people can use it. And we're doing it through this ethical impact assessment. But we are also doing it through readiness assessment, because it's also true that small and medium-sized enterprises do not have access to the massive amount of data to produce new products and to use it to take their decisions. So we also need to share the data. And one very concrete and important element is, how do we govern data? How do we ensure that it is shared when it's necessary? How do we ensure that everybody can have access to develop their own services? And actually, we know that the codes and the algorithms can be also protected by IPR, but if those algorithms are producing not very bad outcome for people, we should be able to ask for transparency measures, and we should be able to ask for redressal mechanisms. So as I said, it's just bringing the rule of law to the digital world.
Well, again, it's comforting to know that this issue is being addressed at the global level. And with you as a leader at UNESCO, I'm certain we have a champion, not only with people of color, but as a woman, because absolutely AI impacts women differently than it impacts men. So thank you for your work. I think most importantly, what I hope people can take from our discussion today is to really educate yourself as much as you can. Understand what's happening when you click on, when a website says, do you accept these cookies? And you click on yes, just know that you've just given them permission to track you. Essentially, that's what it comes down to. And we need to really be careful, because everything we do every day, speaking of data, we're being tracked. And maybe that's good, and maybe it's not so good in the long run. So we're asking everybody to reach out. Please come to aiinu.org if you want to learn about AI basics in an easy to understand language and in English and Spanish. And we will be adding more content looking forward and hopefully working more closely at a global level so we can share this information globally, because everybody needs to know, particularly communities of color and women and any other marginalized communities, because sadly, we're the ones that are most affected, but can also be helped with the AI for Good tools looking ahead as well. So I'm so honored to have joined you, Gabriela, today. I'm looking forward to continuing this conversation and to understand more about what your organization is doing. And I think together we can do some good. So thank you.
Well, I have to say that when I was hearing you talking about these very practical tools, because it comes down to that. It comes down to people knowing their rights. It comes down to engaging the communities, engaging the civil society, to engaging those groups of people that are usually not represented in these conversations. And therefore, I feel that there is almost a complementarity in terms of the fantastic work that you're doing, Susan, with this awareness and with this information, so pedagogical in the way you present it, and the way that we are really calling countries to be accountable. Because at the end, companies will operate in a space that allows them to do things. And it's for the governments to ensure that the safety, that the privacy, that the non-discriminatory outcomes are ensured also in the digital world. And this is what we are advancing. We hope that the recommendation is going to be approved, is going to be really a global standard. We will be delighted to continue working with Hispanics in philanthropy, but also with you and with everybody that is around, because we're lagging behind. We Latinas are lagging behind, and therefore we're putting a lot of our efforts to advance a more inclusive agenda.
Thank you.